Hello everyone, my name is Alec, and I want to welcome you to episode 3 in this Hero Journey series. Today we will cover the first 2 stages of the second act in the hero's journey: tests, allies and enemies, and approach to the inmost cave. The 6th stage of the hero's journey, tests, allies and enemies, is usually the longest part of the story, or at least the part where we dwell the most when writing or enjoying any kind of narrative. The reason for this is that there is a lot of ground to cover. Despite the fact that the rules of the world where the story takes place have been laid out in the ordinary world stage, the transition from the overworld to the underworld means that we must learn new rules, new dynamics, and meet new characters. In this stage, our character has set sail on a ship, just got off a train, started the first day in a new school, or has arrived in a new city for the first time. Everything is new, daunting, and unfamiliar. The mentor, friends, and allies come into play to allow our character to learn the ropes of this new world and continue acquiring new skills that will help them make it out alive. It is also here where the first tangible obstacles are encountered. In the departure act, the struggle happened within our character or in a controlled, familiar space. Here, obstacles come from without, and because the threshold is behind us, the hero must face them. There is no turning back. When we stepped into the special world, we notice a definite shift. The hero might be discombobulated by this unfamiliar reality and its new rules. This is generally one of the longest stages in the story as our protagonist comes to grips with his new world. There is not a set number of tests that the character must go through, although I'm sure that if we look into it, we might find that it's usually 3 tests, because that's how stories go. So this will depend on the kind of story that you want to weave. The nature of these tests will also depend on the story. In some cases, like in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the test can go from learning to fly on a broom to fighting a troll. In The Hobbit, the first test that Bilbo undergoes is stealing from the trolls, which ends up being a kind of preparation from when he goes into Smaug's lair. Bilbo also gets to practice riddles and wordplay on spiders and Gollum before the showdown with Smaug, which also includes speech as a centerpiece. If your character won't end up exchanging riddles with the dragon, but instead could use other skills like swimming or beating someone at a chess match, passing an exam, or learning how to cook fajitas, then the test should focus on these areas. The same principle applies to allies and enemies. Depending on the kind of story you're telling, your allies and enemies will vary. They could be a Ranger of the North and a Dark Lord, like in The Lord of the Rings, or, in Harry Potter we have Hermione and Ron and a Dark Lord. I need to start using different examples. But think along the lines of secondary characters equals allies, and the antagonist is the enemy. There are, however, many other potential enemies or obstacles. Maybe there is one huge threat, like President Snow in the Hunger Games, but there are other minor characters that are also enemies, like the other tributes or the peacekeepers. In other genres, the enemies may be more abstract, like procrastination, self-doubt, or negative influences. Because in our life we don't typically encounter Dark Lords or killer robots, our enemies can appear in different shapes and forms. Maybe a teacher can be an enemy, not because they are inherently a bad person, but because they can hinder our advance. They can be an obstacle towards our goals through their actions. Or maybe it's that sneaky classmate who borrowed your Nintendo Switch and hasn't given it back yet. Once you have established a couple of exciting tests that your character has gone through and fleshed out a bunch of secondary or incidental characters that help or challenge our hero, then we're ready to move on to the next stage, which is approach to the inmost cave. This is the first time that your hero stares into the eyes of the enemy, the big challenge, or they go into the danger zone. This isn't necessarily a physical cave. Instead, the inmost cave refers to the most dangerous spot in the other realm, whether that's the villain's chambers, the lair of the dragon, or the Death Star. And almost always, this is where the ultimate goal of the quest is located. It may not need to be a physical cave, but in many classics it is literally a cave, which is why it's called the inmost cave. The hero hasn't arrived at the cave yet, but is about to enter it. Think about it as a rehearsal before the real struggle begins. In your story, this will be a bit more difficult to explain and maybe just a scene or an instant in your narrative. If your hero is an aspiring skateboarder, this may be the time they visit the skate park, pondering the situation and maybe feeling a bit nervous. Because of its association with a cave, which tend to be scary and dark, doubt and hesitance will be at the heart of your hero. And maybe they confide in one of their allies that they're not 100% ready. The main characteristic of this stage is that it helps build some tension before the next stage, which is the ordeal. And this is when things really get rolling. That will have to wait until the next video though. So what I will do right now is to proceed with my own narrative and exemplify these two stages. The first thing that I need to mention is the time frame of my story. I started last week by saying that I moved to Tijuana in 2017, and this story will cover up until late that year or maybe the start of 2018. The reason of this choice is because events in my life allow me to cover all stages in about 6 months. So now that we have cleared that up, which I should have explained in the beginning, let's move on. After I moved to Tijuana and I found my bearings in this new city, I started making friends and a few antagonists, as well as facing new challenges. My main allies through this journey were my roommate, who I knew before the journey began, but he became my steadfast ally after we started living together. Other than that, I had a couple of friends from work and, of course, my parents. With the help of my mentor and my allies, I was able to face the first tests, which included a couple of job interviews, commuting for 2 hours to Tecate back and forth because I still work there, but I lived here, so I had to go back and forth every day. And, basically just dealing with being in a different place. Additionally, a few weeks into my life, I got both jobs that I interviewed for when actually I had 3 jobs. And I found myself working 52 hours a week. It was crazy. Not only did I have to balance a rough schedule, but I also had to meet new students, coworkers, different bosses, and learn how to do a lot of things that I had never done before. During this point in my life, I think that there weren't many enemies to speak of. Most of the struggles happened within myself and had to do with how much I was working, how little sleep I was getting, and the fact that I was definitely biting off more than I could chew. I would leave my home at 6:30 in the morning and then come home at 9:30 at night most weekdays. I also worked on Saturdays, so even Friday felt a little bittersweet. And at first I felt that I could handle it. I was younger, I was ambitious, and almost pathologically optimistic. It was not a sustainable model, and my approach to the inmost cave happened on many fronts. In the physical realm, I worked at the inmost cave. It was a private school where I taught 4th graders, and I loved it. But I was under a lot of stress, and there were long hours, and the workload began to get to me. So I felt myself disconnected with the parts that made me happy a little at a time. I approached my own inmost cave, and I slept even worse, and I became a workaholic, so I was doing little else than think about or be at work. Even Saturday nights made me feel anxious because I knew that I would not be working the next day. Instead of relaxing and enjoying my day off, it stressed me out that I was not being productive, and it was crazy. At that point in my life, it was clear that the solution was to change, and I was not going to make it through the school year like this. So I started thinking about what to change or how to face it while trying to keep grips on my mental stability when the ordeal presented itself in my life. And this constituted the AntiChamber to the ordeal, which was a pivotal moment, and things would never be the same. It would push me towards my goals, but it was also bitter, and it was drenched with sorrow and grief. However, the ordeal will have to wait until our next video when I talk about the ordeal and the reward. So that's gonna be it for today. You know the drill. Thank you for watching. Remember that the sources and materials are always linked in the description below, and that you can post any questions or thoughts in the comments. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you in our next class. Take care of yourself.